And the wheels will go faster, but they don't need to be going that fast. That's all we need for speed. And I'm cupping my right hand and I'm pressing in towards the center point of the clay. So there's the contact on my hand, just on my palm. I'm not squeezing with my fingers. I'm pushing with my palm into the clay. And then the part of the hand, so whatever happens in one half of the clay happens all the way around. So my hand is contacting from the center down here. The part that's not contacting there is this hand is pushing in there. So if I push in here, the clay comes up. And if I push there, the clay comes out, and it's a balance of the two pressures. I have big hands, so I have my thumb down here, but most people find they have their thumb up on top. So whatever you've got there, it's from the center down. And then you want to make sure the clay is damp so it doesn't grab your hands. And I'm pressing in towards the center, and I'm squeezing the clay, and I'm keeping my arm really rigid, driving from my elbow. And then the clay conforms to that orbit that I'm creating with my hand. So how do I know I'm centered? If I can put my finger on there and I stop bouncing around, then it's centered. It's important to take your hands off slowly. So if you take your hands off too quickly, release the pressure too quickly, then it will knock it out of center because it takes the last point of contact. So it's important when you release the pressure, you just release gently, and you have to sort of anticipate that it's getting dry and just put a bit of water on so it doesn't stick to your hands. So once we're centered, then I'm going to put my left hand on the way I have my right hand. I'm going to use my middle finger, and I'm going to make a hole down in the center. And again, I'm bracing myself on my legs, and I'm going to make a little bit of a divot there. So I'm using this side of my finger is opening up the clay, and I'm keeping it rigid so it doesn't bounce around. So that's creating my center hole. I put some water in there, and now I'm going to continue down. My left hand is keeping the clay down as I'm displacing the clay. It's keeping it down, and it's keeping it on orbit on the outside. And I'm going to release gently. And now I'm at 3/8 of an inch from the bottom. And you can also take the water out to visualize it, but I can feel that it's 3/8 of an inch. Do you want to feel that? The thickness? Just take your thumb and finger there and just feel in there for a second, and visualize it as well. Yeah, put your thumb right down. Yeah, that's right. So that gives you, in time, you'll intuitively feel when you're at the right depth.
Oh yeah.
Okay?
My turn. Oh, see, I think that's too close to the bottom. That's why I stopped sooner.
So I'm 3/8 of an inch now, and then when after I open up, I'm going to compress my bottom. So I've left an extra 1/8 of an inch for the compression. So now I'm going to bring this finger towards me. So I'm not going to hook it. I'm just going to straighten it up. And if I just straighten it up slowly, it opens up the inside flat. If you hook it, then the bottom will come out curved. And it's important just to come out slow enough to allow the clay to be affected by your fingers. If you come too quickly, you can pull it off center at this point in time. And this left hand is keeping it all on orbit on the outside, and the right hand is keeping on orbit on the inside. So now that I've opened it up, now I'm going to compress my bottom. So I'm going to go into the center, and I'm going to go out towards 3 o'clock. I'm just pressing down the pressure of a firm handshake. And then I'm going to go back into the center. I'm just going slowly so the clay is affected by my finger. I'm not going to go too quickly, and I'm just going in that line between center and 3 o'clock. Clay's just feeding in the pads of my finger, and I'm just applying pressure of a firm handshake. And I'm going to do that 5 times. And the reason I'm compressing the bottom is that every time I bring the walls up, the clay particles are being compressed together. So if I don't compress the bottom a similar amount now, I can run into a problem with a crack in the center in the shape of an S. And that, when you're pulling the walls up each time, the clay particles are being compressed. And when you become proficient, it'll take about 5 pulls to bring the walls up. In the beginning, if it takes 25 pulls, that's good. It's just about getting control. So we want to have the bottom compressed a similar amount. So I'm going to put a bit of water on there. Now you see my shape is sort of donutty. I'm going to take my thumb and my finger, and I'm just going to straighten it up like that. And I'm going to push down with this part of my hand with my sponge loaded up with water. So the clay is just passing between that space. And that just squares the wall up before I start to pull with my fingers. So it's all nice and even now. And the important part here, my bottom's nice and flat on the inside because I'm not going to get back in there to the bottom. It's all compressed. And then this corner here is a nice 90-degree corner on the inside, which is important. So now I'm going to put a bit of water right where I need it. So when you put the water on, just direct it with a sponge like that. Don't sort of do this type of thing, just direct it where you need it. And I'm gonna have one finger inside and one finger outside. At this point in time, I'm gonna slow my wheel down just a little bit because I don't need as much speed. And I'm gonna start at the outside, I'm gonna push in at the bottom. And I'm just gonna come up until I meet my inside finger, and I'm gonna bring both fingers up together. They're across from each other. I'm just gonna bring them up together slowly, giving time for the clay to be affected by my fingers. If you pull too quickly as you're coming up there, then the clay hasn't been affected by your fingers yet, and your top will be all wobbly because your wall is kind of like a thread. It's thick and thin. And I'm gonna level the top. So I come up almost to the top and I release gently. If you come right to the top, inevitably at some point in time you'll slip, your fingers will slip over. So I come almost to the top and then I squeeze with my thumb and finger here, and I put my index finger across the top, and that just gets that top a little bit, but it also levels anything that might be uneven from the pull. I do that every pull so that my top always stays level. So I'm pushing in at the bottom just a little bit. So each time I come up, I'm making the space between my fingers slightly smaller by moving the outside finger in. The inside finger is coming up in the same space each time. The inside corner doesn't change, the diameter doesn't change. It's the space between the fingers from the outside finger moving in just a little bit. I'm gonna come up until I get almost to the top and release gently. I put a little more water on, I level my top. When you do this, if anything, push in towards the center a little bit. You notice that my piece is tapering in just a little bit. That counteracts the centrifugal force. People tend to push too hard sometimes here and pull towards them, and then that'll pull it out into kind of a bowl shape. So I'm just taking this pull again, making the space, moving my outside finger in just a little bit. Try to breathe when you're coming up. Release gently, level your top. And I'm keeping my fingers the same distance as I'm coming up. I'm not coming together. And at the bottom here, it's important to get rid of that, Jasmine was talking about our ski slope. You push in here at the bottom, get that clay right in there at the bottom to start with. You have to keep the pressure there a little longer. It's like water pressure at the bottom where your finger isn't there. It's just the base. So you're pushing in and the clay is coming up underneath itself. So you have to push it long enough and hard enough to get the clay to move. Okay, my glasses on. So when you become proficient, it'll take about 5 pulls to get the clay up. And when it's taller like this, I use a sponge on a stick to get the water out of the inside. And it's a good idea to keep up with the water so you can see what's going on the inside. My sponge will there. So now that I've got the clay up, now I'm going to start to shape it a little bit. So when you're shaping, when you're pulling, you're just keeping the pressure between your fingers equal, the space equal. And you're coming up relatively straight. So when you're shaping, all I'm doing is I'm moving. I'm not changing the pressure for one finger or the other. I'm just moving the 2 fingers where I want the clay to go. So if I want it to come in, I just gently move in. And I do this gradually. I don't do it all in one pull. I just do it in a couple pulls or 3 pulls, depending on the shape. And always release gently. And when you're doing this top part, try not to thin it too much. Try not to squeeze too much and make the top too thin. So now if I want to give it, right now I've got fairly smooth outside, but if I want to give it throwing rings, I can just push a little harder and pull a little faster on my last pull. if I'm not decorating the pot, if I'm using a glaze like the Temaku or something that breaks over the throwing rings, I often do that. And then I'm gonna float my chamois over the top here, just between my index fingers, just around that top. And then I'm gonna use my undercut stick down at the bottom. Get my little undercut there. So I'm gonna, first step is just to go down. Take that little bit off. Turn the stick over and just turn it down towards 2 o'clock to take away that little burr. And then I'm gonna go be a 1/4 inch up off the wheel head and just go in on the angle until I hit the wheel head slowly. Turn it down and draw it away from the pot. And if there's a little burr on there, which there sometimes is, I just hold the stick on there just to scrape that off. And then I use my sponge. I'm just gonna hold my sponge on there just to soften that bottom edge. There's a bit of clay still there. And then on the top, if I want to accentuate the rim a little bit, I'm going to just take the end of my stick here that's got this little flat spot, and I'm just going to push in here at the rim. I'm supporting it on the inside with my other finger, just pushing in a little bit. And though I haven't really changed the rim very much, the way the light hits it makes it look more defined there. And then I chamois down to that spot. So it just changes up the rim a little bit. And I'm not happy right here, so I'm just going to take a little bit off of that. And it's important to make sure while the pot's on the wheel that you're happy. If there's any little details, like there was a bit of a burr still there, if there's any little details that you're not happy with, then fix them while they're on the wheel. And then I'd like to just turn the pot slowly so I can see if there's any hunks of goo or anything on there that I can't see when it's spinning. So then the last thing, I'm going to cut it off. And when I cut it off, I always, so when you hold your wires, just hold them out tight like that. It's about keeping it firm. When I cut it off, I turn the wheel. I suggest you, when you're first starting, you just pull straight the way through and keep it static, because if you lift up, then it can cut into your pot. The reason I turn it is that when you're in larger pots, if you turn it and you come in from the outside, the wire doesn't have any pressure to make it bow up in the center, because it's cutting in slowly from the outside. So I always turn the wheel. Any questions?
When you were on your third pull, is that when you made the top the same width as the bottom, roughly?
No,
Okay,
my 5th pull.
okay,
After I got the clay up, then I started shaping.
okay.
Once I had it all up, then I started the shaping. Any questions? Okay, so you'll need a bowl of water. Remember